This little wire almost caught fire, and that wasn't the hardest problem we solved on MrBeast's set, where 100 people ages 1 to 100 were pressing these buttons to choose whether or not they'd do a challenge. And you're probably wondering, why the Van de Graaff generator? It's to demonstrate the level of stress we are under, and to show you what happens when you plug these buttons into this potato, that's this tiny little computer, while kids are having the zoomies in socks on carpet, generating thousands of volts of static electricity. I recorded over 13 hours of vlog footage, and I only looked like an idiot most of the time.
And Jeff. So, there he is, being a weirdo talking to himself.
I'm Jeff Geerling, and I used to be sane last Thursday. On March 1st, Network Chuck texted me, "Hey Jeff, what's your bandwidth like for the next 2 weeks?" 2 weeks?
You serious?
MrBeast needed a way for 100 people in 100 rooms to vote on challenges, and they needed to be able to control lights in each room. We just needed to drop some buttons and a light strip in the room, connect those into a computer, and we're done. But it's not that simple. The biggest problem was time. I woke up on March 1st not knowing anything about this game. Less than 48 hours later, Chuck and I had already ordered over 100 computers, power supplies, relays, wires, and tools to put everything together. And that was before we even had a working prototype. The software, the hardware, I had to get something working, and quickly, because the shoot was 2 weeks away. I needed hardware fast, and I'm fortunate to have a Micro Center just 10 minutes away. Raspberry Pis were out of stock, so we bought 100 of these clone boards, this tiny little computer called Le Potato. This is a Raspberry Pi clone that's a few years old, but we don't need anything with a bunch of horsepower. We really want wired Ethernet and wired GPIO pins to connect to the buttons and the lights. So that's what we're going to go with. We're going to try to order some of those. I don't know if they're going to come in time. I also ordered an extra one to send here ASAP so that I can start testing on it and making sure that the software that I need to write will work. Probably going to do that in Python. I don't know yet. This is kind of crazy. I could control switches with these little pins, and I remembered seeing a handy little relay board at Micro Center I could slap right on top. These things have 4 little relays. Each one can control 1 LED color. The cool thing about these hats is there's already software for them, and they screw right on top of the board, so there's no wiring mess. I ordered the board on Micro Center's website and used their 18-minute pickup service to grab it right when I got here. Every minute counts when you're working on a MrBeast video. But they only had 1 in stock. We needed 110, but I let Chuck handle that problem. I only needed 1 right now. And yes, Micro Center's sponsoring this video. I have a link below for 25 bucks off your purchase of 100 bucks. I just wish they had a Greenville location because that really would have helped when I got on set. Speaking of locations, they just opened a new store in Indianapolis, and I hear Charlotte and Miami are getting new stores soon, so comment below where they should open up next. Ideally, I'd build my own circuit on a custom PCB, but with only a couple days and without William Osman's crack team at my disposal, I didn't want to risk it. The goal was to keep the hardware simple, with off-the-shelf parts. Chuck worked on ordering everything, and I'm sure some of you watching this will question our choices, like why not use RS-485 or CAN bus? Couldn't you just use Wi-Fi? Don't worry, for all of you, I wrote a blog post, and I also have another architecture video for my patrons on Patreon. Links to both below. But here's the basic idea. I have a 3D printed button box with a Cat5 cable that connects buttons to pins on the computer. Then, LED strips connect through the relay hat to a 24-volt power supply. A central Python app on the farmer server works with all the potatoes, 1 in each room. We prototyped this in less than a day, so we knew it wouldn't be perfect. My guess is that within 10 minutes before this video starts shooting, we're still going to be debugging some problem, whether it's on the server that's running it all, whether it's on the single board computers that we're going to have to figure out after the fact. We'll see. But in less than 10 minutes, I already ran into my first problem with this potato. CPU interrupts didn't work. Instead of the potato just waiting for a button press then notifying my code would have to spend all day asking if the button was pressed, over and over. That's called polling, and it's not ideal. 100 computers in closed boxes hammering their CPUs all day long, it's a bad idea. Luckily, I found this other OS, Armbian, that made interrupts work. Great, except the relay hat stopped working. Eventually, I found a way to recompile device trees to get it all working together, but that burned up precious hours. That same day, we went from 2 buttons to 3, and they wanted to control the little LEDs inside the buttons too, so more software, more wiring. And later that day, I found out they wanted 6 light strips, not 1. 6 of these light strips on 1 tiny relay? These little guys are only rated for 3 amps. Network Chuck's team was pre-assembling things already, and I knew we'd need more help, so I called up my dad, who's a radio engineer. Would you like to come with me, possibly?
I would not mind going along, for the ride.
and I might even be of help.
A video about how he helped is over on our Gearling Engineering channel. But it was time to write some code. You press a button, my code sees that, then it tells the main server. Easy. Well, you'd think so, but every time I pressed a button, it would show up like 15 times. What's going on? Anyone who's programmed buttons knows exactly what I ran into. Bounce.
When you're working in software, 1 is a 1 and a 0 is a 0, but when you click a button, it's not always cut and dry.
Like any good programmer, I spent 12 hours reading the history of buttons, debounce circuits, and software debounce, and then I had a revelation. I wanted to see why these arcade switches were so bad. So I pulled this switch out of the button and wow, that sure doesn't look like it's bouncing. That looks instant. So I whipped out this bad boy, my oscilloscope, and well, there it is. Why can't I see that in real life? Well, if you look closely, my scope is looking at time in microseconds. Even my phone's slow-mo couldn't see something that fast. I'd need at least like 25,000 frames per second. So I emailed Gavin from Slow-Mo Guys, but he said they actually rent high-end cameras because they're just too darn expensive to own. I mean, he's not wrong. So then I found Chronos, a less expensive high-speed camera from Kron. They were gracious enough to loan me one of their cameras that maxes out at 24,000 frames per second. Hopefully that's enough. At 1,000 frames per second, I still don't see any bounce. I had to go all the way down to 24,000 FPS and narrow the sensor down to just a tiny sliver, but finally, right there, I saw one tiny bounce. Miss it? Here it is again. Just one teensy tiny bounce, and even with a light hot enough to start a fire, there's flicker because high-speed photography is insane. But that does show what's happening. The analog world of springs and metal just doesn't translate into perfect ones and zeros. And the rabbit hole goes deeper. I also tested this 100-year-old light switch from Second Empire Strikes Back, and look at that. Even 100 years ago, engineers were working on debounce, in this case with a huge spring. Subscribe if you like buttons. I have like 10 hours of slow-mo button footage, and now I can't stop noticing buttons everywhere I go. I think my kids might think I'm crazy. But where were we? Oh, right, I still had to finish this prototype and meet up with Chuck in North Carolina.
And hopefully this will be the only night that I stay up super late working on this.
Good joke, Past Jeff. After spending another evening learning Lua scripting so I could load test my app with 500 votes per second, my lack of sleep was catching up to me.
Since we're using potatoes, we're going to use the potato provisioning process, which is PPP, and anybody who does networking will understand that. Anyway, dumb joke, but you know.
The pace was insane, but
it's kind of a rush when you nail something. So I get that on this project, so it's kind of fun.
What wasn't fun was the smell of burnt plastic in my office.
One time I was testing multiple lights at the same time to see how much current it drew, and the thing got pretty hot, enough that I was smelling the plastic. So yeah, if you're going to light these strips, and especially if you're going to light all the colors at the same time, I wouldn't leave them in the roll. I would take them off and put them like this. It also looks a little nicer.
And you'd think I'd learned, but no, I did the exact same thing again later. So we decided to order a bunch of 10 amp relay boards just in case. And I was glad I invited my dad. We were going to need all the help we could get.
Luck favors the prepared. We'll see how prepared we are.
But when we got to North Carolina, there was bad news. The rooms wouldn't be ready by the next morning when Network Chuck arrived. So my dad and I organized toolkits, and the next morning we all organized the potatoes and racked up 3 Cisco switches to network everything together. Chuck got 2 NUCs online, and I deployed my Python app to both. If the main server went down, we could quickly switch to the backup. I had my dad spend some time testing the LED light setup, and also the longest network run. I think secretly he was trying to find a way to justify trading his house for that video wall though. But he had to head home, so Chuck and I finished organizing all our equipment and headed out for the night. And right as I was climbing into bed, I got a text saying button boxes showed up. I was gonna lay in the bed and just like watch YouTube for a little bit and then fall asleep, but now I'm going back till midnight, so see you there. What I found wasn't great. These buttonholes were a tiny bit too small, and there was no cable pass-through. We started reaming out the holes with a step drill bit, and eventually this awesome guy Travis used a hot bolt to melt a cable channel into each box. But while we were working, a gust of wind knocked down one of the rooms that was still being assembled, and that kinda summed up how I felt that night. My dad had gone home, Chuck's crew was already sleeping, and I decided it was best to get some sleep too and reset in the morning. My watch is even going to sleep now because it's so late. It's 1 a.m. and We're a few days out, and we have not set up one room yet. We don't have any pies in the floor. I planned on sleeping in a little, but no. I was gonna sleep until 8:30, but some high school kids at this hotel decided to run through the hallway with those screaming chickens. And my hotel must have been cursed because the next morning, this happened. I apologize for my attire right now, but today I'm taking a shower and water pressure's gone. So I just, luckily I had just finished my hair, so that's clean, but nothing else is. And you're not gonna believe it, but I had another adventure the next morning. Yesterday, there was no water at all, and today, there was no hot water, so apparently here in Greenville, they have it out for me. And back at the studio, we were in the middle of integration hell. Since things were a little behind schedule, they got some great electricians and production techs to come help. But we had emergency after emergency. Like, we had 90 LED power supplies installed, then poof, the rest just disappeared. At this point, we are diving through all of these boxes because we're missing 10 power supplies. That's a big emergency because we only have 91 and we need 100. So, even hiding in the maze of tables here, hoping beyond all hope. There's something. Clamps. These are clamps. Oh, just stepped. Knelt right down on that. That's gonna leave a mark. Hey, there you go. Squid Games battery packs. I should take one of those to see if any have a charge still on them. Scare someone with it. That'd be fun. Gonna escape the maze of tables. Ow. But someone found them, and we finally powered up the last row. Of course, that was right after we overnighted 30 more power supplies, go figure. Then I wanted to do a safety test. I left the white LEDs on overnight, and the next morning, I checked on them. So we did have one major issue this morning over in the first row when I was working on wiring up some of the buttons. I touched one of these wires. These are male-to-male DuPont jumpers. And there's no rating on them. They don't have like the actual wire gauge, but if you strip one of these and look inside, there's just, I call them like little whiskers, little itty-bitty pieces of wire stranded. That makes it easier to bend them and stuff, but that also means that they can't hold current quite as well as a solid core wire of the same gauge. So I'm going to make 100 of these little jumpers, and this is 22 gauge, which should hold that rating, and that'll be more useful. The task list was growing longer, and meanwhile, I was scrambling to wire up the button boxes. I had this pile of like 100 unassembled button boxes, and we decided to solder the button connections and hot glue the wire into the slot for better reliability. And I'm glad we did, because I had no idea people would be mashing them like this.
Why are you pressing it so much?
Let's do the challenge.
All right.
Take it easy there, buddy. Luckily, I got some help from two locals, Q and Julian. They were awesome, and they also freed me up to tackle some software bugs. But there was a new issue. Since the holes were open and construction was going on, some potatoes got stepped on. Like, look at these micro SD cards, completely cracked in half. And a few potatoes got mangled too, like this one. We started with 10 spares, but we were already down to 6. And we had LED problems. A strand that wasn't lighting, or colors were off, or multiple colors were shorted together. That last problem was the worst because with double the current, even our new wires could burn up. And my phone added insult to injury. I got this alert in the middle of all this and I'm like, yeah, I know I'm stressed. But none of that. I mean, none of those issues even comes close to what happened next. See all that blue stuff everywhere? That's protective film. The walls were all acrylic. I have this tiny little sheet here. You know what happens when you peel the film off? Static. This is like less than a square foot, and I can already feel it. Now imagine what happens when you start peeling miles of protective film. Mayhem. Mayhem is what happens. Everything stopped. There was so much static, my hair stood up like 20 feet away from the rooms. Now, computers can usually survive shocks like this. Electroboom proved that on Linus Tech Tips.
Okay,
But that's just shocking things from the outside. The studio was like a flash fire for these tiny computers. Our wiring was unshielded Cat5 because that was all they could buy on short notice. And you know another name for unshielded copper wire? An antenna, a 20-foot long giant static collecting antenna of death. The wire kept shunting charges right inside the CPU through these little pins.
This is a problem in digital electronics. It's not exclusive to us, and in fact there's a lot of articles written about this, and there's a good thread on the Pi forums about it too that I read.
I'm just glad they shut off power quickly. Otherwise, instead of 100 potatoes, we would have had 100 French fries. Luckily, all but one potato came back up. Power was back and the cleaning crews arrived. They sprayed glass cleaner everywhere, and that moisture did help with the static. But then it exposed a flaw in our lighting. We used indoor LED strips, and they don't have a moisture-resistant coating. So now 20 or 30 of our 600 LED strips were completely fried. This was bad. We had like 8 guys finishing up wiring, but now we had to go back and retest everything. To get back on track, we had to start getting creative. I had to patch some things in software, and we had to patch up some of the LED wiring, but a few hours later, we did have some hope again. Almost all the rooms were lighting up, and most of the buttons were now working. It's pretty impressive considering this was architected in a day, built in an active construction zone, and used unshielded signal wire running at 3 volts in a static minefield. None of this should be reliable, but it actually started working for the most part. And people like Julian, Q, Pites, Network Chuck, Sean, James, Jimmy, and a ton of MrBeast crew got us over hurdle after hurdle. It made me really appreciate the human side of a massive MrBeast video. There are hundreds of stories you'll never see that go into a crazy video like this. And sometimes you run into unexpected surprises, like, did you know that Chris actually uses Raspberry Pis?
So you used a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, I used it to run Pi-hole. I didn't want to have to pay for YouTube Premium, and I used it to not have ads on YouTube on my TV.
Okay, don't demonetize me.
I used to tinker with Raspberry Pi a lot. I put a Linux distro on it. I put RetroPie on it.
Yep.
Pi-hole.
We were getting pretty confident, but our hope was again short-lived. The static just kept coming back. Static charge kept building up as people vacuumed, and every once in a while a random potato would go offline. Every time it was a corrupt microSD card. Luckily, we had this thing, because we could reflash the OS in just a few seconds.
We've been doing that all day, and I'm glad that we have the etcher because that is a lifesaver. They didn't sponsor this or anything, but I did call them up for this project and say, hey, if you could send one, that'd be awesome, and it has been amazing. So, shout out to Belina.
Then we found out some of the button wire had been damaged while electrical repairs were happening, so we had to fish some new cables. Then more LED connections broke, so another group fixed those. Meanwhile, camera wiring poles broke some button connections. I knew DuPont connectors would be a pain, but I didn't plan on there being active construction with the computers exposed the whole time. Julian and Q crimped over 600 DuPont connections onto the floor, but because DuPont connections are evil, we ended up having to re-terminate a bunch of them. We also burnt out 2 of these commercial soldering guns making button boxes. But hope springs eternal. Finally, we did an end-to-end test, and every room lit up this time. It was actually really cool at that point, standing out there hearing hundreds of these little relays switching on and off, validating so many long nights building everything.
I like that effect. Those are good.
I wonder with some of the stuff like that, how much of it was planned and how much of it was just like a happy coincidence.
I know, it's like serendipity once the lights are up.
Then we did our first test vote, and it was a huge relief seeing the producers using the app I wrote to control everything on their mobile phones with almost no instruction. The worst was behind us. But remember earlier I predicted we'd be fixing problems 10 minutes before filming started? Well, we were still fixing problems after filming started. The morning of, Network Chuck and I had to reflash a few more potatoes, but he was feeling pretty good.
You know, I'm feeling pretty good. Like, I'm coffee right now, coffee.
We finally had all the potatoes going.
All 100 potatoes are now running, the farm is live, and none of them have died in the past 10 minutes, so I'm gonna count it as good.
And now it was a race to get every single button working flawlessly.
You might notice that the colors are going insane around me. They're doing all the lighting tests now and camera tests and things. And I'm on the last room, number 47. It had a cable that was just up and missing. Like somebody had pulled it out and never put it back in. So now I have a cable here. I'm going to terminate it and we'll have every single button, this whole place, working, tested.
And I thought 47 was going to be the last problem.
It's so wide.
So we have been doing this button LED wiring for so many hours, so many days. I'm on 5 hours of sleep in the past 2 days pretty much. And we're gonna hit the buttons here and these should work, and if they do then we're done with every single button. And this could be the end of the video maybe, I don't know, but let's see. Okay. The buttons are not working. So he did not set the round up correctly. Now it's set up correctly.
This is test round for
He's
Jeff.
still a good person.
Maybe.
Let's try this again. There we go.
Success.
But then after some final cleaning, room 81 went dead, so I made this custom dongle. The problem was, when they shoved wires through little holes in the floor, some of the tiny wires inside the button cable broke. So I had to tone out every single wire and figure out which ones actually still worked.
So the problem was the blue wires are not working, but let's see, green works, and red works, and orange works. So we're going to use orange. So we had to wire up a custom button box last minute, and we're going to see if that works. There we go.
And we ended up having to wire up another custom button box while shooting was getting underway. Backstage, the lights were out now, so we were squatting down by the trash pile with a flashlight reworking a button box. But we got it done. And another James joined us the last couple days. He was super helpful getting the last bits of wiring buttoned down, if you don't mind the pun. And you couldn't script this, but there were only 2 rooms left giving us trouble. Rooms 66 and 81.
So who's the first person in the cube?
66.
Of course.
We ended up getting that sorted pretty quick, but room 81 threw us a curveball. Apparently, half the wires in the cable were flaky.
So we only have 4 colors that we know work, these 4. So what we're gonna do is make these signals, this a ground, we're gonna rewire the pi out there, and this. We already have people coming in, so this is fun. This is literally, we started filming, and we're making one more button box to hack it.
We ran it out there, and it worked, but the hack did have some capacitance issues.
Okay.
As long as you're slow with it. I mean, it goes green for a second, but...
So we got it done, and it was literally down to the wire. With everyone finally inside, we did a test vote, and every single room worked. At least one of the 3 buttons did.
I made those.
They're coming back up.
I should say we made those. So you made some, you made some, you made some, I made some. Oh, now they're gone.
Oh, down here. It's down here again.
There were a few little bugs, and I did have to remote in and fix a bug on the side of the highway while I was driving to the airport, but in the end, this thing worked. Network Chuck and his crew were amazing, and I met like 5 different Jimmys, but never actually Mr. Beast. And Mr. Beast's crew actually knew Julian, who does retro game repair and electronics work, so that was cool hanging out with all of them just talking about games. Pites and the group of techs who helped diagnose all the LED and button issues were a godsend, and I'm not just saying that because Pites told me he subscribes to this channel. He brought along some fun Pi trinkets like this reterminal, and we talked shop way too late into the night. Then there's the vMix crew, Matt and John and Jimmy, who helped with tons of little bugs once the shoot started. I was actually emotional when I left. I mean, besides the fact I couldn't fit my clothes in my luggage and had to ship them via UPS. I really felt for that 40-year-old when he had his daughter visit, because I felt like that too, coming home to my wife and kids after the insane stress on set. In the end, I'm leaving out 12 hours of footage. There are so many stories left out, and that was just my perspective. But we learned a lot. Integration hell is hell, always. Take some time and talk to people. Everyone has a story, and you'll make new friends along the way. Sometimes the worst problems, like static, are things you'd never even think about, even if they're obvious in hindsight. But finally, just like my dad told me when he left, all the things we did were for the people in the challenge. They had a magical experience, and Mr. Beast gets to share that magic with hundreds of millions of viewers. And that is what it's all about. Until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling.